Ape Escape was released May 31st, 1999 and was the first game to require DualShock controls in order to play. The DualShock controller had long been released since 1997, but Sony took it among themselves to push the controller into non-conventional mechanics and controls. Ape Escape doesn't follow the traditional controller layout. The face buttons on the right side of the controller is used to swap gadgets, while the right analog stick is used to perform actions with those gadgets. For instance, you can only swing your net in the direction you flick the stick. The camera is mapped to the left bumper, and the jump is mapped to the right bumper and trigger. It's an admittedly odd control scheme, but allows for a lot of creativity, and Ape Escape gives the player plenty of time to adjust before sending anything difficult your way. Having said that, let's get straight into the intro of the game. The opening cutscene gives the player all the information you'll need. You play as Spike, who's making a visit to the professor since he's finished his time machine. The lab is surrounded with monkeys that have advanced headgear to make them smarter. They activate the time machine, sending Spike, your friend Jake, and all the monkeys to the past. The monkeys are trying to rewrite history in order to take control of the world, and now it's up to Spike to capture all the monkeys and stop Specter, the albino monkey leader. It only takes the player 3.5 minutes before they gain control of Spike, which is nice. Nothing ruins pacing more than long, unskippable cutscenes. All of Ape Escape's cutscenes are skippable, so repeat playthroughs are not a slog to start up. The first level is Fossil Field, and it feels like a test zone. Much like Mario 64's courtyard in front of Peach's castle, Fossil Fields provides a relatively safe area for the player to get used to the controls. The level features only 4 monkeys. 3 are left out in the open and 1 is on top of this cliff that is currently impossible to collect. Ape Escape heavily features backtracking, and this will be the first time the player encounters it. Unfortunately, Sony never explains this to the player, and the player could find themselves jumping aimlessly at the wall. A sign could have been useful here to teach the player this concept, but then again this is only a small nitpick since the player may just waste a few seconds and move on. Fossil Field features plenty of trees with rewards on the top. The player can effectively learn how to climb here. It also allows for a zone with very few obstacles in the way when chasing monkeys around, again allowing the player to ease themselves in. After collecting the 3 monkeys, the player will end the mission and be teleported back to the time station. The time station functions as a save point, an access point to the gadget training rooms to relearn gadgets, access to extras like games and the monkey book, and of course the level select. The time station acts as a nice buffer between levels. It's especially appreciated during the endgame. After selecting the next stage, Primordial Ooze, the player is shown a quick cutscene introducing the water net, then is placed into a training room.
Look what I've got! A new gadget! Check it out!
This is the water net. Use it when you're underwater. I equipped it with an oxygen meter. I'm sending the new gadget over to you right now. Try it out in the training room. Without training, it will be too dangerous for you to continue on to the next area. Well, good luck.
The water net just functions as a swimming mechanic that also allows the player to shoot a large square net in front of them. By clicking the left stick, the player can dive, and by pressing the right bumper, the player will accelerate. If no direction is being registered, the player will automatically begin to float up. Like the rest of the game, the controls are strange at first, but get comfortable with a little bit of practice, which is why Primordial Ooze is designed incredibly well. When compared to other games and developers, the first level does not incorporate the water all that much. Don't get me wrong, this level is covered in water, but that's about it. The only purpose the water functions as is a punishment for the player for missing a jump. There are no enemies, and there's no way for the player to be hurt when in the water. It acts mostly as an obstacle and as a slap on the wrist when compared to a pitfall that would traditionally fill this role. With the water having been so forgiving, it allows the player additional time to get used to the controls. It also gives the developer an excuse to put Nessie here, giving us a memorable set piece. The monkeys here are usually in the open or on cliffs that the player must jump to. With some careful jumping, the player won't have to backtrack again here far in the future, and can instead re-enter the world immediately and 100% the level. Molten lava is much more conventional than what we've seen so far. The player begins at the base of the mountain and must work their way up, catching monkeys all the while. There's some creative stuff going on here with the pterodactyl, and there's a triceratops we can't get to yet, so we'll just have to revisit the level again to 100% it. At the very top of the mountain is a lava zone with a monkey riding a T-Rex. Have the T-Rex slam into a wall a few times and the monkey will fall off. It's a cool sort of semi-mini boss, but it does highlight one of the problems the game has, which is its draw distance. Without getting too off topic, Ape Escape gets far more difficult the further you go in, and the levels get huge along the way, making it easy to get lost. Unfortunately, this draw distance doesn't help the problem at all, because the player can find themselves especially confused in areas that reuse textures. Nonetheless, it's still a cool ending to a decent level. On selection of Thick Jungle, the player can receive the monkey radar. By moving the right stick in any direction, the player can tell if there's a monkey in said direction. It's not particularly useful right now, but will be on later levels. It does help fix that draw distance problem we just talked about earlier. The player is also given a cutscene officially establishing Specter as the main villain, and our friend Jake from earlier has now been mind controlled. Thick Jungle is the first of many levels to feature what I like to call the Ape Escape design. Thick Jungle has one large zone that has plenty of enemies and monkeys, and there are several branching paths that either branch to each other or branch back into this main first area. Most levels of Ape Escape, barring a few examples, use this style of level design, but let's get back to Thick Jungle. If you have any early memories of this game, then I would imagine it's either the T-Rex in Molten Lava or this massive shocking catfish here. In order to avoid damage from this catfish, you are prompted to use this rowboat, which works but is very awkward to control, much like an actual rowboat. This feels like a gimmick more so than anything else in the game so far, mostly because it's not only faster to ignore the rowboat, but really it isn't all that dangerous. The catfish will only deal 1 cookie of damage and you have 5, so it's better to just get it done with. There's a cool tree mini-boss on this level, but other than that, there's not much else that we can explore yet. This UFO monkey here is impossible to get to and we can't jump high enough to reach this ledge. Dark Ruins is much like Thick Jungle. We have this massive outside part that is platforming in a few areas we can't reach just yet. From here on out, there's going to be plenty of pitfalls, so the player can expect to die more. Much like Thick Jungle, there are plenty of side paths that loop right into each other, or the main area again. It should be stated that there are tons of monkeys in this level. I believe there's 14 in total. So you will have to come back here later to 100% the thing. This is the 4th time I said that you're going to have to backtrack, so for future reference, you will have to play every level 2 times at a minimum. You can never capture every monkey in one playthrough of a level. It's an admittedly weird decision that I feel hurts the game more than it helps it. I understand not wanting to drop every gadget on the player at once, but some of these monkeys seem awkwardly placed just so that the backtracking can exist. A key example would be this monkey in Fossil Fields. There's no interesting mechanic here. The monkey is simply just out of reach and won't be able to be captured until later. But enough about that, let's move on. The Slingshot is exactly as it sounds. It's used to hit enemies or targets from a distance. There's a first person mode which is practically required since the controls are inverted and don't feel that great in the third person perspective. The Slingshot has very little use outside of hitting the buttons and occasional flying enemies. What I mean is I would never use this gadget in normal gameplay. While the inverted controls are not great, at least the right stick must be pulled back, simulating pulling a real slingshot back. It's a cool effect. There are 3 types of shots to use with it: infinite amount of ammo for the normal shot, the explosive shot that deals bonus damage, and the targeted rocket shots, which are actually decently helpful. Cryptic relics is in many ways very similar to Dark Ruins. Both are temples with similar textures, both have sliding traps, both are big with a large selection of monkeys, but Cryptic Relic stands out by incorporating these bridges. It's very easy to die here, though there is very little if no repercussions for death. Cryptic Relic does do a good job of reinforcing the player's basic understanding of the slingshot controls, but other than that, it's just a pretty okay level. Dimension X, or Stadium Attack, is a level in which Jake challenges this player Spike to a race. It can be really difficult and it tests the player on their knowledge of the current game. The coolest part about this is that the level doesn't have to be finished to continue the game. The winner does receive Specter coins, which unlock bonus content. It's a nice change of pace when all is considered. The dash hoop is hands down the best gadget in the game. Unlike the slingshot, in which buttons and obstacles are needed to make it useful, the dash hoop simply adds speed, allowing the player to go somewhere in less time. This mechanic is useful outside of its puzzles and obstacles and makes reruns and replays more enjoyable. This gadget was pretty much always mapped on my controller. Crabby Beach is pretty to look at and it introduces one new mechanic. doors being locked until a certain number of monkeys are captured. It has one puzzle involving this new dash hoop item, but it does very little besides that, and the frames also get dropped incredibly hard here. It's not a great level, and it's probably the most forgettable out of the bunch. And I must say, for the new water zone, there's incredibly little swimming done here. Coral Cave is strange for a water-themed level. Much like Crabby Beach, there's only one area where you're required to swim to catch monkeys. There are a few more dash hoop obstacles and a turret mini-boss that requires explosive slingshot rounds to beat. At the very least, the sharks here are cool and swim around even if it's easy to catch the monkey riding it. There's not much to say about this level, it's fairly straightforward, with obstacles and tougher than normal enemies to test the player, but it's not that long a level, and it definitely is packed with things to do. There's a lot to say about Dexter's Island. First off, I wouldn't be surprised if this level was created after Ocarina of Time was released. The player has the option of clearing out the outside world before continuing to the dragon, which will net you about 3 monkeys. Next, we enter inside the dragon. I'm going to assume this is Dexter. This whole level is inside of the dragon. There are bones, fleshy walls, a giant boat, and the enemies look like blood cells. The reason I say this level seems to be inspired by Ocarina of Time's Lord Jabu Jabu is this enemy right here. It's a mini-boss. It looks and attacks identically to Lord Jabu Jabu's. This may be the first level where you need to use the monkey radar. Dexter's belly is big and the fleshy textures can make this feel like a real maze. Sony does get special props for me though. Dexter's Island is super creative and probably one of the best levels in the game. Snowy Mammoth is a lot like Coral Cave. It's straightforward and has 3 main attractions: the igloos in which the monkey hides from one to the next, the mammoth which requires you to shoot the monkey down at the top, and the twisting tower. It's straightforward but enjoyable. A nice level altogether that really isn't trying to be anything special or different. The Skyflyer is another really cool gadget that can be used during normal gameplay. This gadget does allow the developers to add more vertical space to the levers, which proves to be a cool in the next couple of levels. But at the same time, I would say the Skyflyer is the reason why backtracking is such a massive problem. A lot of the earlier levels were unfortunately designed with the Skyflyer in mind. There's a large list of things that the player can do without the Skyflyer, but there's a large list of monkeys that can't be captured without the Skyflyer. I kinda wish that this game hadn't operated the way it did. I think this game would have benefited if it had gone through a sort of Mario 64 star collection sort of thing. In Mario 64, levels are unlocked once you hit a certain cap of stars. You can't get to the bottom level until you've defeated Bowser, and you can't get to Bowser until you've collected 8 stars from any combinations of the earlier levels. Ape Escape could have really benefited from this. Maybe you need to catch a certain amount of monkeys before you can move on to the next set of 3 levels. This way they could have designed all the levels in mind with the certain gadgets that they have at the time. You introduce a gadget at the beginning of the 3 sets of levels and have all those levels themed with that gadget. But the way it stands is the Skyflyer gets unlocked about halfway through the game. And unfortunately, this means you're going to have to go back to many levels where the only problem was that you couldn't reach a ledge. So you just use the Skyflyer, get to the ledge, and capture the monkey. It's not intuitive, it's not that fun, and it's kind of just a roadblock that wasn't needed. The only level that I'd say that uses this backtracking mechanic really well is probably the Dark Ruins. It has this whole inside the temple sort of thing going on. There's a monkey that's going to run away from you, you need to use the Skyflyer, the dash hoop, and the RC car that will unlock in the future in conjunction to capture him. It's a really cool system, and I feel like if more levels were designed in the future with this in mind, the game would have been helped a lot more. Instead, we have these awkward segments where there's clearly a gadget that was used in mind to capture the monkey, and you use the same mechanic that you reuse in other levels in non-interesting ways. Frosty Retreat does an okay job of using the Skyflyer. There are a few cliffs that are unreachable without it, and the shifting staircase isn't hard, but it's an obstacle. There's another section that unfortunately reuses the rowboat mechanic. Again, the rowboat mechanic isn't that great. It's kind of boring, and unfortunately you do have to use it in this situation since there's so many enemies in the water. Frosty Retreat besides one little room is not that interesting, and unfortunately bleeds into the rest of the ice levels for not being all that great. Hot Springs is a very well designed level, but it suffers from being the third in a row with the same color palette and theme. Hot Springs has 3 things working for it. It takes prior gadgets and gives them a real challenge. The ice bridge is a challenge, and the second bridge gives the player 2 options to pass it, depending on what the gadget they are more comfortable with. While you spend little time in the actual Hot Springs portion of the level, it's still interesting from an art design perspective. Lastly, the polar bears are a cool set piece. The polar bear segment unfortunately is hit and miss though. While they do look cool, forcing the player into a situation where they have slippery controls and expect them to have precise direction inputs is a little too much. Altogether though, Hot Springs is a pretty serviceable level. Gladiator Attack is the harder of the 2 races. If you haven't noticed, the player moves faster than Jake, but Jake performs jumps and actions much faster than the player, leaving the player feeling gypped even though it's really a fair race. All the player really has to do though is make it to the finish line within under a minute. Sushi Temple isn't doing anything groundbreaking. In fact, I would say its first 3 monkeys are quite lazily placed. But other than that, the whole level is quite enjoyable. For once, the enemies are actually a threat and hard to kill. The monkeys aren't placed in hidden areas or have any insane objective in order to capture them, but Sushi Temple still offers another unique area underneath the well over here. Sushi Temple is honest, and it lays everything out to the player, allowing the player's skill to shine through rather than gimmicks. Wabi-sabi wall is a lot like Sushi Temple, but instead of having 3 large rooms, it's one extremely long and dangerous trail. At every single point in this level, you are only steps away from falling off the map. The level is mostly designed with obstacles that can potentially throw you off the map. Wabi-sabi doesn't hide anything. It's a challenging long path filled with obstacles to kill the player. It isn't too hard, but it's the biggest challenge to the player so far. This level also has the worst case of backtracking since there's no gadget that really helps with shortcuts. Shout out to that monkey at the very end of the trail though. Alright, listen to me here. This level comes out of nowhere. Wabi-sabi wall is definitely a long level, but it's nothing compared to Crumbling Castle. This level's objective, rather than catch a certain number of monkeys, is to catch Specter, but getting to him is a challenge in and of itself. Not only must you reach the top of the wall, but you have to figure out how to open the gate to reach him. There are 20 monkeys on this level in total scattered, and while they aren't mandatory, they do a good job of guiding the player to objectives. I can't stress how long this level is. There's a large courtyard zone in front of the castle, there's a main hall and throne room that turns into a large staircase zone operated by this windmill-like object, there's a water-based basement level that seems like a dungeon, there's guillotines here with the monkeys attached to them, which I don't really get the symbolism. But the point is that there's a lot of space to be covered, and while every level heading up to this point only takes about 10 minutes to complete, Crumbling Castle on the other hand can easily take 20 to 30 minutes. I haven't included the mini-boss halfway through the level. After opening up the wall gate and entering the tower, you are greeted with another cutscene where Specter just pieces out and leaves you to fight this very large knight. The battle is pretty easy, just run away when he's charged up, and after he's done doing his big swing, hit him back. A lot of Ape Escape bosses are really simple, mostly just running away for a certain amount of time until they open themselves up, but they always last a long time. Nintendo has the golden rule of 3 hits and you win, or you just move on to the next phase. While Ape Escape likes to prolong its fights by going to 5 hits in between phases and bosses. Nonetheless, you beat the knight, return to the time station, and discover that the professor and your friend Natalie have been captured. There's a cutscene showing off the chaos of the apes taking control, and this is when the AI who's been introing all the beginning of each levels then tells you in order to stop Specter, you must cut through the park, shut down his factory, and climb the tower. This is essentially laying out the next 3 levels. Before we get to our first level, we also receive the RC car. It's a gadget that acts as a second body controlled entirely by the right thumbstick. This gadget will be used primarily to push buttons that Spike can't reach, and its other main use is to also scare and shepherd monkeys around. City Park is the first of the 3 future levels. Well, technically they're supposed to be present day, but it really feels like the future, mostly due to the art choices. This level is split into 2 sections. There's this RC park section up here with a few monkeys hidden around the quiet neighborhood, then there's this sewer section focusing on the new RC gadget. The level is serviceable, but I won't say I'm a big fan of the art direction. You spend most of the level in this gray sewer zone. This is a problem. The next 2 levels are both gray as well, one with a futuristic style and one with this brown industrial design. It's a real bummer, especially since every level prior to this was colorful and exploring it was interesting. The factory immediately gives us this tank item. The tank feels a lot like the raft from earlier. It's kinda gimmicky. When you push the left stick forward, it turns right, and when you move the right stick forward, it turns left. Hold them together and you can move straight. It feels clunky, but then again, tanks aren't meant to be smooth. The tank can be used to bust doors and crates down, which you'll need to do to get to the turret monkey. You can't really dodge its attack since the lasers move too fast, so you're really just going to end up trading blows with the thing. There's a couple of long-winded puzzles inside the factory, and these new mech mini-bosses. There was an enemy like this in the City Park level, but not as hard as these guys. If I have to compare the later levels in Ape Escape to anything, it feels a lot like the Bowser stages from Mario 64. It's normally a pretty straight shot level by going through hallway into hallway with clear-cut obstacles in the way, but it does differ itself up a little bit. You normally have to reconnect into other rooms that are now open because you solved the puzzle or you made it to the end of the obstacle course. There is one section in the factory level that's full of conveyor belts, and it's pretty cool, but other than that, this level is pretty boring, and the grain scenery doesn't help the problem at all. You start TV Tower by finding a few hidden monkeys to open this door. This is another section where the monkey radar can be very helpful to new players. The rest of the TV Tower is a gauntlet. We have to ride the tank again, but through these paths that get narrower and narrower. I wouldn't say there's much skill involved since you can take as much time as you want to cross, and it's mostly just a test of patience. There's not even enemies put in the way except for at the end, and I really hope you win this battle or else you're gonna have to go and do the whole path again. The last big thing here is this nightmare of a fan puzzle. I'm ashamed to admit that I have died here so many times it easily outweighs every single death I've had in every other level combined. Now this is going to be a nitpick, and I understand the fan pushing the player to its death when it's turned on, but even after solving half the puzzle and destroying the computer controlling it, it still pushes the player around, leading to several deaths. It's a nitpick, and I don't even know if I would call it that, but this puzzle sure did kick my ass. The last part of TV Tower is a boss fight with Specter's ship, and this fight mostly comes down to jumping at the right time and running in circles to avoid lasers. It's a classic endurance test, since the ship does a ton of attacks before opening itself up to damage. One nice little detail is if the player has gotten good enough with the Slingshot, there's a small opening for them to sneak in some bonus damage, making the fight go by quicker. We get one more awkward cutscene where Specter says we have some skill, then it's off to the last level. Also, I don't know if you've noticed, but everything exploded, so I don't know how the Professor and Natalie are still alive. Specter Land is gigantic. It splits off into 5 sections total. The western themed part of the park is full of difficult and dangerous monkeys, but that's it. The roller coaster section can be pretty frustrating. The player has to have quick reactions in order to jump over these barriers and not take damage. It's pretty funny though if you die in this level.
This bites.
After beating the roller coaster, you will encounter Natalie, who's stuck in this cage. Navigate your way through the level, press this button, and then capture these 3 monkeys below. She'll tell you to go save your friend Jake and capture Specter. We can't save Jake yet, so we'll go save the Professor. The Professor is stuck in this cage, so we have to climb the outside first. There are these balloon enemies who will home in on you, and the only way to beat them is to use your Slingshot. Making your way up to the top, we'll encounter this clown boss fight. In the first phase, he'll throw balloons at you, and you just simply need to shoot them down and then shoot him. You'll have to do it a total of 5 times. You just need to sneak your shot in between balloon attacks. You're most likely going to take damage here, so make sure you shoot the orange balloons. They drop health. If the player is fast enough, then they can also shoot down the balloons while they're still floating around the clown. After the clown takes too much damage, the floor will collapse. On this phase of the boss fight, just hit him and then jump away. He's going to roll around after you hit him, so make sure he slams himself into the wall so you can land more hits. Do this 5 times, and you'll free the professor. Afterwards, you'll get a cutscene where the audio mixing is not that good, and you can barely hear Specter tell you to go fight Jake in the bumper card zone.
Well, you've gotten farther than I thought you would. But the fun is just beginning. Listen carefully. Go to the go-kart. Your friend will be waiting for you there. This will be the final showdown. But believe me, it won't be as easy as rescuing the professor. There's no turning back, so don't whip out now. Let's see what you're made of.
This is another mini-boss. He isn't all that hard. You just need to use your spin attack on the small cars and then jump over Jake when he tries to rush you. We get another cutscene and Spike and Jake are reunited. Spike convinces Jake to go guard the professor, and Specter challenges Spike to a final battle at his castle.
Are you okay? Don't you?
There's a long and quiet setup to Spike entering the castle. You have to teleport here and then ride these platforms. Afterwards, the gate is locked and these UFOs won't come out to fight you. The player has to explore and activate this monkey to press this button. This not only starts up the UFOs, but starts the music. It's a nice touch to the last level. After defeating the UFOs, the player is allowed into the castle. Here they will find a gauntlet of courses and puzzles, all challenging the player's skills with the gadgets they've unlocked so far. These can be extremely difficult, which is why I'm not surprised Sony left these respawning bonus lives all over the place. There's a lot of zones here with tight platforming and pitfalls, so it really is a test to even veteran players. You gotta make your way to the top of the tower and unlock the final door to Specter. There's another build-up and cutscene with Specter where he tries to mind control you, but then the boss fight begins. The first phase is this cool scene shot from Specter's point of view. The player has to dodge his attacks and make it close enough to deal damage. After hitting him another 5 times, you'll fall to the next level. His mech will then turn into a full-on gorilla. I thought this was a nice touch since they are the largest of the apes. I mean, come on, it's called Ape Escape. He will shoot a variety of lasers at the player and open himself up briefly for counterattack. You'll break both the mech's arms, then he will start to blow out the bottom of the floor. This is probably his most dangerous attack. This boss fight does highlight the frame dropping problem again, and I'm playing this on the PS2, which has better hardware than the PS1. After beating Specter, we get one last cutscene where he teleports away and we beat the game. Roll those credits. Well, not really, it was all just a prank. You, the player, have defeated every level, but you haven't 100% at every level. Specter is still missing, and the professor tells us that we have to go back to every time period and capture every monkey. If you remember earlier, I was complaining about there not being clever ways to reuse the content. It's not like Mario 64 at all. Mario 64 had space problems on the cartridges, so they cleverly reused levels and made new objectives within the levels, but Ape Escape doesn't do that. And I would say that this lazy design is true besides maybe 3 or 4 levels. Most of the content isn't all that changed. The worst offender of this would be the Magic Punch. It's a new item we receive once you start your first level after the credits. It operates as a better stun club. You have more reach and it feels like the monkeys go down for longer. The only thing you lose out on is the spin attack. But what this item's main use is for breaking down walls. That means there are several monkeys that are just behind walls we couldn't get to earlier. Or like I said before, there are monkeys just on ledges we couldn't reach. It's not intuitive, and frankly, it can be quite boring. At the very least, once you 100% a level, you unlock time attack mode, which is a fun challenge for the player. The second loop through the game is a real mixed bag. The first half of the game is fine since it follows the method of one big zone is connected to many small zones. You don't have to backtrack through everything to collect all the monkeys, but later levels like the Monkey Factory, Hot Springs, and Wabi-sabi Wall are awful since you have to replay old content with no changes in order to capture the last few monkeys on the level. This process can take 1 to several hours depending on how thorough you were on your first playthrough. You could revisit levels at any point, and some monkeys you can catch beyond the minimum without the new gear. But that is again a question of how patient the player was. Either way, after collecting every monkey, we will have a final showdown with Specter. This boss fight has 2 phases and unfortunately only has 2 attacks. There's this phase where he's floating around and shooting lasers at you. There's a phase where he's running around on the ground with a shield and he's shooting rockets at you. This fight is a challenge, but mostly just due to the fact that it's another really long endurance test. We capture Specter, he goes back to the zoo, and everything ends happily ever after. Except for when we get 2 more sequels. I may have come off as nitpicky in this video, but I want you to know I absolutely adore this game. It did so many things right, and not many games have come even close to the amount of creativity this game just oozes, especially since it came out in 1999. This game would have 1 remake for the PSP called Ape Escape on the Loose. It would also have 2 direct sequels, Ape Escape 2, which is fine, and Ape Escape 3, which I think is an underrated game, honestly. It's not nearly as good as Ape Escape 1, and I would say it's on the same quality as Ape Escape 2, but it really gets put down for some reason when I don't think it deserves it. If you're on the fence about playing this game, I can't recommend it enough, though you will have to have a PS1 or a PS2, and you'll have to buy a PS1 copy if you don't want to emulate it. I want to thank you all for watching, and happy 20th anniversary, Ape Escape.
Gotcha!